we are here at Thread to help HR and payroll teams build high performance, high culture companies. That is our goal in life. And personally, what I like to do is simplify HR to support engagement. So you may be wondering what Thread Engage is. Thread Engage is the name of our HR services that we offer to our clients here at Thread. I solved the human capital management platform, which is an end-to-end system that does everything you need it to do. So today, what we are here to do is provide a HR health checkup, which is going to include several things, some basic tips, some best practices, a little bit of regulatory advice, and then some of my jibber jabber thrown in as well. My name is Scott Mastley. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for Thread. And I've got about 25 years in the human resources industry. The last 16 of those years are all consulting directly with small and mid-sized clients, and then building HR consulting teams, training them, and having the joy of working with them and getting to experience the daily challenge of what happens in HR, which I'm sure you are all definitely aware of and familiar with. But basically, we're talking about tips and best practices and things to think about as you're getting ready for next year. So that's the quick health checkup. It is more of like a bullet list summary type presentation, not a deep dive. We could do a very deep dive on every one of these slides if we wanted to. And if you are interested in that, please let us know, because while we set our schedule ahead of time for our webinars, we can always be flexible and adjust that. And if a lot of people have an interest in a specific topic, then we will knock it out of the park for you and tell you everything you need to know. We try not to waste time on fluff and get right to it. So one of the things you do every day is you bring your own brain and your body to work with you. So to pretend that that's not there is kind of crazy. And that's why I'm starting with this. I want you to think about, we're all a little bit of brain fried in the month of December, trying to wrap up everything we can and also be prepared for next year so we can hit the ground running. But you shouldn't forget about yourself and think about your own health first. Not just your physical health, your mental health, but your career health, all of those things. And that's what this is about. So take a second before you really just jump into what all your to-dos are related to work, and think about what you need to do for you. So career-wise, are you certified in HR? If you're committed to a career in human resources, I think that's very important. A few years ago, nobody knew what it was. People had asked me what this SHRMA thing stood for and all that. But now I often talk to prospects and clients who say, will our advisor be certified? Because that's important to them, right? They know what it is and they value it. So in your career, if you're not certified, I definitely recommend that you become certified. It's up to you which certification you choose. They're both great. They're both very thorough. So you make that decision. But bottom line, if you decide to do it, be prepared for a serious commitment. It is not a joke. There's a pretty high failure rate from people who don't put in the time. So make sure if you commit to it that you are really committed to it. That means you're going to have to sacrifice, put some things on hold, and make it happen. But it's definitely possible. If you are already certified, what's way worse is to let that lapse. And I have had that sad conversation with people, because it is brutal to have to earn it once and then redo it all and earn it again. So if you are already certified, and I'm not selling certifications, I just believe in it, make sure you don't ever let that go. Get all your credits. In terms of your health, think about your physical health, your mental health. If you have not gotten your physical this year, go ahead and plan that. If you've got something that's bothering you, get it taken care of so that you are starting ready to go. If any of you have ever had any kind of health scare, you know that that immediately sets all your other priorities at number 2. So think about making your health number 1. Take care of yourself. Give yourself the oxygen first. You know the drill. And make sure you're in good shape to go mentally and physically. Think about your job, your position, your company, your career. You have certain areas where you are extremely confident. You are the FMLA master, or you are the ADA guru, or you are the person who is best at standing up in front of a room and training people and keeping them engaged. Whatever it is, identify where are the gaps. Where do you think you need to grow? Where do you need help? What would you like to learn more about? What did you used to know that you have recently forgotten because you haven't done it in a while? And I take a few minutes to identify those things so that when you're looking ahead, you can speak up and say, here's where I need help, or here's where I really want to learn this year to make sure I'm filling these gaps in my career so that I'm a fully rounded generalist, not just a specialist in one thing in HR. One of the challenges I've had hiring HR consultants over the years is when people come in and apply for a position and they have done one thing and they can do that one thing better than anybody on the planet, but that's it. And that's hard to work with when you're on a small business or mid-sized business, because in a small business you need people to do as much as possible. So the more exposure you have, the more experience you have, the better positioned you are in your career. So that's just Scott's unwanted career advice. Now let's think about your technology for a second. So when you're looking at your technology, you can call it your payroll platform, you can call it your human capital management system, you can call it whatever you want, but basically, are you using it and taking advantage of it? Are you still collecting paper and asking people to sign paper forms and then figuring out where do you want to stack them in the right place in your office so you don't lose them, and then labeling them in the folder and putting them in the file order in your cabinet? And how many filing cabinets do you have? And do you have pre-hire forms and new hire forms? And how much time are you spending doing all that stuff? I know from years of auditing hard copy paper employee files that it typically takes two people 8 hours straight, no lunch. Ask anybody who's worked for me. Scott skips lunch when we're doing these audits. To do about 50 employee files, to just log what's in them if the company's been in business for a while. So if you have 100 employees, you're talking 16 hours of two people, which is 32 hours of labor, not including travel, just sitting there thumbing through hard copy files. That's a lot of time just to identify what's in there. And believe me, a lot of businesses are in the position where they need to do that as a starting point. So if you are not paperless for your onboarding, meaning that you can just send a link to a new hire and they can click that link, digitally sign everything, and now it's all saved in your system, clean and crisp and exactly where you need it, then that could be a goal to set for the year, right? Same thing with applicant tracking. If you're not using an applicant tracking platform, at iSolved and Thread, our applicant tracking thing is fully integrated with the system. It's not a third-party thing that we bought and try to tack on and make it work. It was actually developed by the company, so it all fits. But if you're not using it at all, you definitely need to be using that, because it will drastically increase the efficiency you have with posting jobs, with tracking your applicants, qualifying them, putting them into buckets, setting up specific application questions, doing background checks, drug screens, automating all that stuff so it always follows a specific workflow. All of that is really important and can help you tremendously. When it comes to orientation, one of the things that I hear almost every time I talk with a prospect or a new client is, I wish we had a better orientation. And that is universal. So if you're in that same boat, don't feel bad. You and almost everybody else wishes they had a better orientation program. Why is that? Number one, a lot of us don't have teams that are devoted to that. So we're pulling from multiple resources and teams to get people involved in orientation. Everybody is busy. So sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to spend 2 hours with a new hire when I have my own deadlines to hit, right? So the more you can plan it and put it into a process, the better. If you have a really great technology platform, you can add your own videos for orientation, your own welcome message from the CEO or the president or from the team. You can do fun videos and add those in there. You can assign courses if you have a learning management system. So an LMS is basically a system that's integrated with your payroll platform where you can assign courses like how to comply with wage and hour laws or HIPAA compliance, right? You should be sending encrypted emails with everybody's social security number instead of just forwarding them, to all your friends. Leadership courses, safety courses. You can also add custom content, which I highly recommend. So typically the learning management systems will have 100 or so courses that are great. you might be able to use 50 or 60% of those, and then you can create custom content for yourself, which I definitely recommend that you do as you go along. So if you don't have these things, I would say ask some questions with your vendor. Feel free to reach out to us at any time at threadhcm.com if you'd like to see a demo of iSolved and see what the system's capability is. Performance management as well. If you are still doing a hard copy performance review form, this is another thing I hear a lot, which is I would love to go paperless with performance management. I would like to upgrade. For a lot of us, just going to a paperless system is an upgrade in itself. And when you do that, you can typically set up workflows where if you want the employee to do a self-evaluation first, and then once that's done, it alerts the supervisor to do the supervisor evaluation. All of those can typically be set up and tracked along with auto reminders to notify supervisors when the 90-day or the annual review is coming due. So when you automate all of that stuff, sometimes, believe it or not, the HR person or the payroll person will say to me or to us, what am I going to do? And they start to worry sometimes about their job. Am I still going to be relevant? Am I going to be needed? And yes, you are still going to be relevant and needed. Somebody still needs to run that platform. Somebody still needs to feed it, track it, approve it, train people on it, all of those things. But also what it does is it frees you up beyond the minutia sometimes of the HR admin work that our jobs require, and gives you the opportunity to focus on the things that are fun, like becoming an employer of choice or increasing employee engagement or planning a awesome event that people remember forever. Whatever it is, it frees you up to do those things, which are much more fun than doing admin work, even though we all know it's a part of the job. So since we're talking about the end of the year, let's talk about some things that you should consider and maybe take a quick glance at before you wrap up and go home for the holidays. One of them is OSHA record keeping. So if you are required to comply with OSHA, and most companies are, if you have 10 or more employees, you've got to do OSHA record keeping. There are some industries that are partially exempt, and that's based on your NAICS code. So if you know what your NAICS code is, you can go to OSHA.gov, OSHA.gov, and just look up the record keeping section on the website, and then there will be a link there for partially exempt industries. And you can pull up your NAICS code, sorry. And once you have that, if you're on this list, then it gets you out of doing some of this record keeping and reporting online to OSHA and things like that. So, for example, 5413 is architectural, engineering, and related services. If that's your code, then there's some of this stuff that you're not required to do. 4532 is office supplies. 6111 is elementary and secondary schools, but there's a 2-page list of industries. So look at that list before you put in all the time and work, because it might not even apply to you. Now, if a OSHA officer shows up and says, I need to see it, good luck arguing with that person about you being exempt or not. OSHA record keeping is typically required to be posted February through April each year at every location, and you only post your summary. So if any of y'all are familiar with the OSHA log, you have a 301, which is your first report of injury. That's what you use to record when people get hurt. You have your OSHA 300, which is your log, where you put individual information on how they were hurt, when they were hurt, did they miss days from work, things like that. And then you have the 300A, which is the summary from all of your logs. So if you have 10 locations, you have to do a OSHA log for each location each year. At the end of the year, you complete that log. You have an officer of your company sign it with the summary of your logs. And the summary says we had this many type injuries, lost time injuries, no lost time injuries, that kind of thing. You can determine an incident rate, which is basically a ratio that's like out of every 100 employees, what's the percentage of people that got hurt on the job. Now, there is a difference between recordable and reportable when it comes to OSHA. So recordable with a C means that you must record it on your OSHA log and your OSHA summary. And there are rules for that. Not every injury has to be recorded. So make sure you're aware of what those are. So reportable with a P, reportable, is what you report to your insurance company. That's your decision. You decide what needs to be reported and what doesn't. There's an argument where people say if you're paying workers' comp insurance, you should report anytime somebody gets hurt. You just do it for record only, which means they won't set up a fund to feed that claim if you think they're not going to have doctor's bills and things like that. There are multiple ways to do that. So learn your OSHA record keeping. You can go to OSHA.gov to download the forms in Excel, and those will help you keep track easily. You can also keep track in most HCM platforms as well. So EEO1, look in your payroll platform, make sure that if you are over 100 employees or if you're planning to eventually get over 100, then start thinking about how are we going to gather that? Is that a default form in our onboarding platform? Can we turn it on? Do we need to create it? What do we have and not have? And just start thinking of that so you're prepared and you can get ahead of the game. That's the goal in HR, is to be proactive instead of reactive. That's a challenge that all of us have, including me, which is how do I get proactive when the dirt keeps coming in the door? You know, it changes every single day. We know how hard it is to get down your to-do list. So Affordable Care Act notices, typically your payroll provider is going to work with you on those, but it's always worth asking ahead of time, are we ready for that? Do we have that? I have, believe it or not, multiple times have had a client who believed that they had the Affordable Care Act covered in their payroll platform when they did not. And at the end of the year, when they said, how do we just generate these 1095 and 1094 things? And then you look in there and they don't even have that benefits module set up. They're not tracking it. And then that becomes a big uh-oh moment and a mad scramble to get things done on time. So it's always good to be aware of what you have in your system, what you don't have, and is this available to you? How are you going to get your reporting? The 1095 goes to employees, you know, and to the IRS. And the 1094 is basically the cover sheet that goes to the IRS saying that we've done this stuff, right? In terms of posters, many people will order a poster once a year. A lot of the poster companies are going away from just having a federal or state all-in-one poster because there are average of about 100 changes per year that happen, mostly state laws, sometimes 2 or 3 changes per state per year. And a lot of people are going to a update program where you automatically get the updates emailed to you. We offer that as well. So if you don't have the poster up in every location, you need to have it up in every location. And where it comes into play is if you have your workers' comp panel, if you don't have the minimum wage info, the GINA, the FMLA, the harassment, all of those things posted, people, when they file a lawsuit, could say, I was never notified, even though you have something in your handbook. It's just another way to say everybody who clocked in every day saw this poster, right? So it is important to have it. It could be used against you if you don't have it. W-2s as well, just making sure your payroll information is correct and current and accurate. So when you go to submit those, also sometimes people have the option to get a electronic version of their W-2 where they just log in and see it in their self-service, or to have it mailed to them. Make sure you know if people have elected the option where they actually want it mailed to them. Benefits related, I have about a 10-page document that lists all of the notices that go along with the 401k plan. So I'm not going to get into all of that. That could be a webinar by itself. Number one advice would be have a great broker who's going to guide that process, and a third-party administrator who's going to say, we can help you provide these notices. Typically, the HR person or the HR team and payroll team are the ones who are distributing those notices, but you need to know what they are. Some of the biggies: if you have a safe harbor notice or safe harbor plan, you have to do a safe harbor notice typically in the first week in December. So if you have a safe harbor plan and you have not sent your safe harbor notice to your employees, that needs to be a pretty urgent to do to get on that. If you're intending to transition to a safe harbor plan, go ahead and get that going out as well. The summary plan description should be available for all employees for your benefit plans. This seems like an easy no-brainer, but what you should do is say, where is it? Ask any of your employees, where's the summary plan description? And I guarantee you a lot of them, number one, don't know what the summary plan description is, and number two, don't know where to find it. So that's a quick test for yourself, like a self-audit. Would your employees be able to locate that? Do they even know what it is? Do they know what's in there? Now, I bet you $100 that they're not going to read it, even if you show them where it is. But some people will. I have met even benefit specialists at companies who don't know what's in the summary plan description, and they are not rubber stamp policies. They are different. There are decisions that you have to make. The 5,500 with a 401k and other things, they're usually due July 31st, but you could turn it in January if you wanted to. So you can talk with your brokers and other folks and say, let's make sure we're going to be on track for that. The summary annual report that goes along with these things as well is typically within 7 months of the close of the plan year or 2 months after you file your 5,500. If you're a covered entity for HIPAA, you've got to send out HIPAA notices about that. Make sure people acknowledge those. A great source for those is hhs.gov, hhs.gov, Health and Human Services. Medicare, if you have people who are Medicare eligible who are turning 65 during the year, they need to get notices as well about that. So thinking about your forms and policies, when's the last time you looked at your employee handbook? Have you kept up with state law changes? Have you kept up with changes in your company? Have you changed your PTO, your holiday? Have you grown from 40 employees to 50 employees? And now you need to talk about family medical leave, job protected leave. Have you shrunk? You used to have 100 employees, now you have 30. So, but your policy still says that you have FMLA when you don't have to. If you have 50 or more employees in your company, then you fall under the law. That doesn't mean every employee can use FMLA, but it does mean you are covered by it. So you need to have a policy about that in your handbook. If you have not done an annual review of your handbook, then you definitely should. Make sure you have a resource that gives you access to all the state laws, especially if you have a multi-location operation, because that's where a lot of the action is, and that's where it's tough to keep up. When you're thinking about your job descriptions, do you have essential functions listed on your job descriptions? Not just duties, but actual essential functions, because the question related to the Americans with Disability Act is, can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation? If you don't have essential functions listed, how do people know what those are? And if you haven't reviewed your JDs in a while, they might not be accurate anymore. Make sure they're current, reflect what people are actually doing. They should say if the position is exempt or non-exempt, should list the physical requirements of the job, the work environment that people are going to be exposed to, and should have a disclaimer at the bottom that says, yes, I agree that after reviewing all of this, I am capable of performing the functions of this job, da, da, da. So if people apply for unemployment later and say I was not capable of doing it, you can pull out this form and say right here, he said he was, and that just helps you a little bit. When it comes to pre-hire and new hire forms, you need to make sure those are current as well. The consent forms have changed a little bit over the years in terms of what language needs to be in those, what should not be in those. I oftentimes see one big consent form crammed onto one page, and usually that's not kosher. So you got to talk with your provider for your background checks and drug screens and make sure they're helping you with that, or your HR consultant, or if you need help with that, call us anytime. The trick with pre-hire is the process as well. Make sure you've got a workflow going that you follow time after time. There have been class action lawsuits against companies who don't follow the process, who don't give the Fair Credit Reporting Rights Act statement, or who don't do a pre-adverse or adverse action letter when they choose not to hire somebody because what's in the background check. Your new hire forms, make sure those are current as well. If you have a travel and expense policy that says you can get an $80 hotel room, that's old. It needs to be updated. I have stayed in what should be an $80 hotel room, but they hit you up for $200 an hour. It's such a rip. But keep up with the times, and because you don't want to stick your employees in a place where they don't get any sleep because they're scared to death. I did stay in a hotel room one time where the door would not shut, so I just had to prop a chair up against it, and I figured if somebody came walking in, I'd hear the chair on the floor and I'd get up. That's not the experience you want your employees to have when they're traveling on your dime. So look at that and see if it's up to speed. Performance reviews, like I said, a big thing I hear all the time is I wish we could improve our performance review program. So look at that. Do something that's practical. Don't just go with what's trendy. Do something that works for you. Do something that accomplishes your goals. And that's the key with an effective performance review, that it accomplishes what you want to accomplish, not what you're reading about, not what you're hearing about, not what's cool, what works for you, what's practical. what gets the job done, helps your managers in their job, and helps employees understand what they need to do to perform at the best of their ability. Look at arbitration agreements. If you have those, there are a lot of law changes about those in California. They're basically a no-go going forward. If you have them in California, you can still use what's already in place, but they're probably going to be challenged. So be aware of what those laws are, and make sure you're having attorneys review any employee agreements that you use, because those things change a lot. Self audits. How long has it been? Have you walked through your processes to see how efficient they are? Your pre-hire, new hire, performance management, your leave of absence process, for example. In your leave of absence process, do you have a step in there where you're actually speaking with the person before they go out on leave, saying, I want to make sure you understand the letter that we sent you that outlined what you need to pay for benefits while you're out, when you're expected back, when we should check in, all of those things. The simple rule is always just think about, if it were you, what would you want to know? Answer those questions. Have the conversation with the employee ahead of time. Make sure you answer all his or her questions and their concerns. And then most of the time that will get you through okay. When you talk about pay equity, that's a big issue in the news. I definitely recommend that if you go and do a pay equity audit internally, that you do that under an attorney guidance, that you can pay them $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is, out of the gate, to say, help me through this process so I have attorney-client privilege, because what you discover is discoverable, and you need to know that if you do have a problem, that it's slightly protected, and then you can get advice from your HR consultant or your attorney about how to address those issues. Okay. In terms of your employment filing system, you need to think about, is that old? Is that new? Are you doing it properly? Are things in your files, if you have hard copy files, that shouldn't be there? And should you set a goal for cleaning those out? So if you have one big folder that has benefits information, workers' comp claims, I-9s, doctor's notes, payroll history, all that stuff, then you probably need to work with that. People ask me all the time, how long do you keep this stuff in terms of record retention? Basically, general guidance is, if you got an employee file, keep it 7 years. That pretty much covers you. If you have OSHA logs and summaries, you keep those 5 years. After it's 5 years old, you can shred it. If you have an OSHA exposure incident, you got to keep that for 30 years. So that's like a hazard, chemical exposure incident or bloodborne pathogen incidents. Any records of that, you're supposed to keep for 30 years. So for most of us, we're just going to pass that on to the next person. In terms of I-9s, you want to keep your I-9 either 3 years from the date of hire or 1 year past the date of termination, whichever is longer. 3 years past the date of hire or 1 year past the date of termination, whichever is longer. There are spreadsheets for that and systems for that, so you can learn how to do that. If you have not audited your I-9s in a while, it's a good idea to do that. I can tell you that in 25 years, almost every single company I've ever gone into, where they had a full HR team or not, the I-9s are about 80% incomplete or incorrect. They're almost always wrong. So it's a good idea to read the fine print on those, become familiar with them, make sure they're right. I have had I-9 audits before at different companies, so that's important to keep in place. In terms of wage and hour compliance, have you had an audit? Are your job classifications correct in terms of exempt and non-exempt? Do you have a way to justify what those are? The tendency is for people to want to call people salaried when they're not. The low-hanging fruit that lawyers are looking for are inside sales positions, assistant manager positions, executive assistants, people like that really need to be looked at to see if their classifications are correct. So think about your pay practices, making sure you have those classifications correct. If you have people you're calling salary and they are making below $35,568 a year, which is $684 a week, then you have some decisions to make. Are we going to give those folks raises? Are we going to change them to non-exempt? Are we going to change a job classification from accountant 1 to accountant 2, because an accountant 2 does something different than accountant 1, right? And make sure these positions descriptions are accurate. If you have people below that, you need to be making decisions now about how you're going to handle it, communicate to people correctly, think about what you're going to do if people say, well, wait a minute, was I not being paid properly before, or whatever? You have to think about that. For the executive, admin, and professional exemptions, you can use about 10% of that can be a bonus. But for the highly comped, as long as you're paying them at least the $684 a week, a lot of that can be made up, the rest of it in bonuses and commissions, because a lot of those folks are paid on performance instead of a fixed salary. Okay. Think about independent contractors. That's another big area for lawyers right now that they're looking at. If you're calling people independent contractors when they really should be employees, if they're dependent on you for their income, they're probably an employee. If you're telling them where to go, when to be there, and giving them equipment, they're probably an employee. Make sure you're tracking everybody's time and telling employees that we don't allow time off the clock. And if any manager tells you to work off the clock, it needs to be reported immediately. You need to look at your overtime bonus calculation. Overtime bonus calculation is if you have an hourly employee and you pay that person a bonus, you need to add that bonus amount back to their pay to update their regular rate of pay, which will in turn affect their new overtime rate. And then you pay them the spread between the overtime you already paid and the overtime that is now owed because of the bonus amount. So if you're not familiar with that, and a lot of people are not, that it seems complicated. It's not that complicated once you've really studied it a little bit. But if you're not familiar with that overtime bonus calculation, please follow up with questions about that. Talk to your HR folks about that as well. Look at the state final pay requirements so you're prepared for that. States like California, you may have to pay somebody on the spot if they're walking out the door, and you need to be prepared for that if that's the state law. Also, some state laws will require that you include vacation time with the final pay, even if your policy says you won't. So you need to know about that. Get organized. This is the Scott Mastley soapbox slide right here for anybody who's on here who's worked for me in the past. I know you're laughing and rolling your eyes right now, and that's okay. If you have one inbox with 5,000 emails in it, you are not being efficient. You need to set up subfolders in there so that you can easily find things when you search for them later. We all tend to fool ourselves into believing that we're going to remember something. And I'm 50 years old now, and I can tell you that I don't. So it's better for me to be organized and put things in inboxes and subfolders, move toward paperless so workflows are automated and I'm not having to shuffle paper and look through drawers. I set up files and binders. You know, if you have a bookshelf that has a bunch of files and binders in it, you should look at some of those. I pulled binders off the shelf that I hadn't touched in, 8 years and thought, why did I keep those for 8 years? So take a look at those things every once in a while. If you have vendor contracts or any of those coming up for renewal, and do you know the terms so that you can negotiate those to your advantage? Are you a drug-free workplace where you're getting discounts on your workers' comp? There's about 11 states who offer a discount anywhere from 5 to 7.5% for workers' comp. So if you are taking advantage of that drug-free workplace discount, then make sure you're aware of when that certification was achieved so that you can look at recertifying during the year. Typically, that process is nothing more than filling out a new application, checking the boxes, and attaching a check to your state. They give you a certification. You show that certification to your workers' comp broker, who is then required to give you that discount, even retroactively if you've earned it for that state. So take advantage of that discount if you're in any of the states that do that. If you're curious to know what states have that discount, it's Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Mississippi, South Carolina, Arkansas, Wyoming, Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee all offer discounts for being a drug-free workplace due to workers' comp. And what you have to do is you have to have a policy, you have to do training, you have to have certain content in your policy, and you have to do certain kinds of testing. Most of the people are doing it already, so just make it formal and get the discount on your workers' comp. Also, do you have employees who are out on leave? Sometimes people are out on leave and we forget about them because they're not here, right? Out of sight, out of mind. And all of a sudden somebody shows up and goes, hey, I'm back from leave today. And we go, oh yeah, we're not ready for you. And that's an awkward situation that does happen. So be aware of who's out, how long they're out, check in with them when they're coming back, talk with their supervisors about being ready. Are they paying their benefits if that's your arrangement with them? All of that kind of stuff. And then also licensing, tracking, and updating. iSolve, the system that we operate on, our human capital management system, tracks licensing, can do auto reminders, alerts when people are due to renew their license. This is really important for medical offices, hospitals, dental offices, any place that requires licensing, financial management offices. Keep track of that in your system, enter it, set up auto alerts so you don't have to remember, because again, if you're human like me, you might not remember everything. This is when you kind of look through your payroll data. If anybody have had address changes, have those been captured for your W-2s? You don't want those W-2s or any final pays or anything to come back to you in the envelope, and now you're wondering what to do with them. So make sure you've updated addresses. Get people to check. It's not a bad idea to ask your employees, can you go out there and give a quick glance to make sure your address is current in the system, so when we send these things, if you are sending them, that it goes to the right place. If you need to update your tax elections, make sure you're looking at those. Emergency contacts, make sure those are current as well. If you have carryover for PTO or vacation balances, you want to be prepared for that. How much are people going to be able to carry over? Is that accurate? You want to look at it at the beginning of the year as well to make sure the system updated properly, that it didn't just go haywire and give everybody twice the time they should have. And that you remind employees that if you have a carryover balance, usually people will say you have to use it during the first quarter or something like that. So make sure you're reminding them of that. Make sure you're aware of your holiday schedule. They've communicated that to your employees because they're going to be asking a lot about that. And you're prepared for when people can be off, when you're going to let them go, basically a half day or anything. It's just easier for people to be prepared. Training. This is a good time to look at what you're doing training wise. Are you keeping track? Are you using a learning management system? Have you hit the topics that are on this slide? These are all important topics to cover when you're training your team, when you're training your managers. Most managers have very little training other than required stuff that they go watch and sign off on and may not even pay attention to. So it's really important to make sure that you have followed up on this, that you're delivering quality content that's relevant to what you do, making sure that people understand it. So there should be some kind of quiz component or follow-up to test understanding. And that's how, if the Department of Labor questions you, you can say, we did the training. We also tested their understanding to confirm they got it. And we live out what we say we do in that training. You have to actually do what you say you do. And you should be offering this kind of training for your supervisors and for your employees as well. When you think about your culture and your brand, this should be something that you are being intentional about. So be intentional about, if you are posting on LinkedIn or you have a company Facebook page or you're posting things on behalf of your company, what are you posting? What is the message you're sending? Who is the audience? What events are you sharing? What does that say about your company? All of this is important when it comes to recruiting, which is probably the number one problem that almost everybody has universally right now, is how do we attract and keep the best people? Because we're all looking for the best people, right? And there are only so many great people out there. So what you do here matters. The world is changing. A few years ago, nobody heard of Glassdoor. Now you can log in and see what people make in the company, what they say about the CEO, what they say about not just what it was like to work there, but what it was like to interview there. So you even have to pay attention to your interview process. Are you following up with the people you don't choose to hire? That's important. It's kind of like your Uber driver giving you a rating after you get out of the car. That matters the next time you go to order an Uber. You might not even be aware of what's happening, but what you do does translate into the marketplace. So if you normally don't follow up or let people know they're not going to be hired once they've completed your application process, I would highly recommend that you do something. Something is better than nothing. People always thank me when I reach out and say, we have hired someone for this position. I appreciated meeting you. I wish you the best. We'll keep you in mind. They just say, thank you for letting me know so I don't have to keep this hanging out there, right? If you have changes to your policy or practices, you think about, are there incentives that those changes create? How will it affect our culture? How will it affect how we're known in the community? Get feedback from your candidates, get feedback from your employees, and make sure, again, like I said, that you are being intentional about this stuff. End of year is also a great time to analyze. Let's look back, right? This is something we all do. Year where we look at lagging indicators, such as how was our turnover? When you look at turnover, you don't just want to say our total turnover was 30%. That's only meaningful to say, do we have an issue or not with turnover? How do we compare with the industry? You want to look at by job, by position, by tenure, by everything. to drill down to causes, right? Why did people leave? Was it voluntary, involuntary? Dig into all of that kind of stuff. In terms of incident rates, workers' comp, how did people get hurt? What were they doing? Were they wearing personal protective equipment? What time of day was it? I mean, you can go deep on all of these things to determine types of injuries, injury causes, how you can prevent people from getting hurt. Are you moving into expanding into other states where maybe your current plan does not have great coverage? So you're always looking ahead. Have you budgeted for increases that are coming with regulation requirements, right? When the Affordable Care Act came out, everybody had to increase their budgets for compliance because there was so much required just to accommodate what companies are required to do to meet the goals under that plan. Are you in alignment with company goals? Have you veered off track? Are you still in alignment with what your corporate team, your leadership team thinks you should be doing as an organization? HR gets a bad rap so often because they say, and mostly I meet with the owners of companies and the executive teams of companies. I've been doing that for 20 something years. And mostly what they say is when they want to outsource HR, it's because they say our HR person is not in touch with how we make money, doesn't know how we operate as a business, has unrealistic goals and things like that. So it's important to know how your business makes money, and are you in alignment with that? Are you supporting those goals, right? In terms of goals, if you identified during all of this analyzing and during all of this looking back and how you did during the year and thinking about your personal career, the company goals, and what you want to achieve as an organization, what are the gaps? Have you identified those and how can you move forward there? What are your own professional skills that you'd like to improve? What kind of knowledge are you missing that you'd like to gain during the year? What processes could be improved? What processes do you have that are not documented? So could I come sit in your desk and follow your process or not? If I couldn't, then think about how well that could be documented during the next year. Are you using technology the way you should? Sometimes people are holding a finance calculator and using it like an adding machine. If you have the capability, see what it is and learn how to use it, right? Documentation is really important. Are you organized and are you documenting things properly so that you can help yourself be more efficient in the future, so that you can protect yourself if need be, you have a defense if needed? And then are your actions supporting and building employee engagement? That's a big issue in the workplace now. It's really about the employee experience that you are helping to create with your management team. So don't just think in terms of compliance and administration. Think about strategy, long-term goals, attracting and keeping great people, having the best culture you can through giving a wonderful employee experience. That doesn't mean people don't have to work and they can play ping pong all day. It means they should be held accountable for performance, but they should also be supported in a way that helps them perform to the level that you want. And as a long-term HR geek, I appreciate what all of you are doing out there because I know it's not easy. I know what you put up with every day. And I think it's really important and hopefully it was worth your time to join this webinar. And I hope you continue to join our monthly webinars going forward. Call us anytime we can help at Thread Engage.